You are Locked On Bulldogs Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Bulldogs Postcast, your home for the best Georgia Bulldogs football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tanisha Batiste. Alongside me is Jarvis Davis, and today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. The Locked On Bulldogs Postcast is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we'll talk about a Georgia defense that has only allowed 6 points in 10 quarters, or 12 quarters rather, of play this season. And the Golden Eagles were just, glad for the mercy rule. We'll give you our thoughts on it. But first, let's talk about how the number one team in the nation made it 41-0 in the regular season with today's 48-3 win. Now, Jarvis, the first pass for Carson Beck today was a perfect strike to Dillon Bell and really seemed to set the tone. But for you, how did you like how Beck and also Mike Bobo set that tone early to be aggressive in their passing attack?
Mike Bobo listened to our podcast, the Atlanta Football Party, on Tuesdays. Yeah. I mean, what else is there? Because here's the thing. Like this, we talked about Carson Beck being like a rhythm quarterback, and he has to be able to get those, little cobwebs or get warmed up, get into the game. And I think that they did that by Anthony Evans had the nice punt return and put them in scoring position, to start off that drive. And then first play, 22-yard pass to Dillon Bell for the touchdown. So that's the type of stuff that I like to see, being aggressive, because that's how you take these teams out of the even consideration or even thinking that, hey, they have a chance to win this game. So that's what the really good teams do. That's what the national championship contending teams do. And we've seen Georgia play like that. And I think that Mike Bobo is more than willing to come out being aggressive and start getting that offense going by passing the football. And I think that they did that, right off the bat. And as soon as I saw that, I was just like, oh yeah, this is going to go exactly how we talked about, as far as going ahead and getting that passing game going. And then you can kind of bleed the clock out with the run game.
Exactly. Yeah, we've talked about how when you have Carson Beck under center, why not let the pass set up the run instead of vice versa? And you saw, of course, the same thing that we saw last week, but maybe even a little bit more than that, because when you look kind of down the roster, if you will, you see like literally 15 players. So we got to call them pass catchers, because there were 15 different Georgia players that had an opportunity to catch a pass. And then also, going to your earlier point, you look at Arian Smith. The long of his 4 receptions for 73 yards was a 50-yarder. Dillon Bell, 22. Lawson Lucky, 37 yards. And Jacoby White, 21. Those are really your top 4 in terms of long receptions. And you talk about that deep ball and the importance of this giving that offense an opportunity to kind of look a little bit different than what we saw last week. And that's also how you get 2 touchdowns in the first 33 seconds to start the second half, which was absolutely crazy. But speaking of that pass catching core, how impressed with it were you, and who impressed you the most in terms of who caught balls for the UGA today?
This is a guy that I want to go back to the spring game that I felt pointed out and just said, hey, this dude can be a real red zone threat. And I'm talking about Colby Young, transfer guy from Miami. So when you think about it, just the size that he has. Georgia hasn't had a guy of that ilk, of that size for quite some time, because we think about Ladd McConkey being the lead guy. No shade towards his talent, but he's not that big of a dude. But when you think about, Colby Young coming into play, he is a clear red zone threat. And this is back-to-back weeks that we're talking about Colby Young getting in that end zone. And for him to be that guy going forward, you got to look at him and say, that's a guy that you can go to in crunch time, win those big games coming up, like we know that the Bulldogs have here in just a couple of weeks. So for me, I feel like Colby Young, did exactly what I feel like he can do and what he's capable of, and that's getting in the end zone when you need somebody to come up with a big catch for you.
Exactly, and that was me and my feeling about how else were they going to make it kind of creative and how were they going to spread the ball around. And I really like the fact that we got an opportunity, and we'll of course talk about these guys in a little more detail on the running side of the ball, but just getting Branson Robinson and Trevor Etienne involved. I love to see that they are really about, hey, we've got pass catchers, we've got guys that can catch the ball out of the backfield. So to see Branson Robinson get a couple of receptions, 2 for 21 yards to be exact, and to see the same out of Trevor Etienne, 2 for 14 yards. So I just like that they were incorporated into that passing game as well, because you need to be able to have more than just a vanilla method in which you go about, as we talked about, as the season gets deeper in and the competition gets a little steeper, especially with what you saw, for example, Texas able to do earlier today in their passing game. But speaking of Trevor Etienne, he made his debut for the Dogs today, of course, after serving that 1-game suspension against in the game against Clemson, and that was for his DUI arrest earlier this year. And again, this was one that everybody kind of was excited and intrigued to see. 5 carries, 78 yards, of course, along with a 45-yard carry. What'd you think about Etienne's debut and his performance?
He's just dynamic. He's exactly what we thought he was going to be. He's exactly what he was at Florida, and I think that he's going to be able to have a really, he was going to be accentuated more with this offensive line and what they bring to the table, because like the dude is just so sudden. Like when he gets out on that perimeter, on the edge of that defense, and he got a one-on-one with the safety, he has no chance. That safety has no chance to make the tackle. And it's not like he's just doing all this and nothing. Like he just real quick, real set. That's all he's doing. And that dude is just falling all over the place. And he's still almost at full speed too, T. So when you think about it from that standpoint, like I love Nate Frazier and what he brings to the table as a freshman, but oh my gosh, there is a difference when one is in the game. So for him to make the debut like he did and have those runs, breaking off that run, like that 45-yard run, it's like, oh my gosh, this dude is explosive. He's as advertised. So, and I think that the Bulldogs, once again, they got him one.
Yeah, I think so too. It was exciting to see him make his debut. But you mentioned Nate Frazier, and of course we know Branson Robinson. We'll again talk about him in just a second. But heck, even Carson Beck kind of got into the mix with 3 carries for 18 yards. But when you just look at this running back room overall, you just got to think to yourself, man, this has to be the most complete running back room in the nation.
And you know what? And I'm gonna pull a Kirby Smart. You gotta add Cash Jones in there too. He brings something to the table. I think that he's going to continue to be used in certain moments, because what he brings to it from a pass blocking standpoint, that is very important to Kirby.
Yeah,
he and I understand it, like as a head coach, because that's a lot of times what's the knock on a lot of young running backs is, can they pass block? When you're making that jump from college to the NFL, we understand how important that is. That's why a lot of guys only in on certain situations. And then when you have those running backs coming in only in certain situations, we turn around and hand the ball off to them. That makes you obvious when, because teams watch film. They're going to watch. Like, okay, if Nate Frazier coming in the game, they win. How much do they pass? None. Like it's not good. That's not necessarily a good thing. So when you think about what all of the guys that have, they have in that room, like you mentioned, and with Cash Jones and being that veteran guy, walk-on guy, Kirby Smart roots for those type of guys. And then you have Trevor Etienne back into the fold, and the dynamicism that we saw today, and I'm sure is going to continue to grow and highlight those attributes that he puts on the field. And then you talk about Nate Frazier, and also Branson Robinson and what he brings to the table. Like you mentioned, he got in the end zone. Everybody was out there celebrating. That's the type of culture that Georgia has. Kirby has everybody being number one fans of their teammates, and that is. And I know being in the locker room, that's not necessarily the case. Everybody don't necessarily like everybody when it all boils down to it. But at the end of the day, I think that Kirby is doing some really great things. And when you talk about the makeup of this running back room, this is probably one of the. I'm not gonna say it's the best, because they had some really good ones, but it's shaping out to be a really good one for the 2024 season.
Yeah, and it's certainly showing itself to be one of the more complete, if not the most complete in the country. And speaking of Branson Robinson, maybe only 3 carries for 22 yards, but he got himself a touchdown. And like you said, that was one that the entire team was excited about because it was his first touchdown since scoring, of course, 2 in the 22 national title game. He was out all of 2023 with that ruptured patellar tendon. So really just good to see him back on the field and able to contribute for this Dogs offense. Now, speaking of the Georgia defense, they only allowed 3 points and, of course, 6 points in the last 8 quarters so far this season. But we're going to talk in between the hedges on how they've been able to get it done. This episode of the Atlanta Football Party, or rather our Locked On Bulldogs postcast, is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Now, it's not just a job board because it helps you to hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. So in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading jobs or job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. Now, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Why? Because they know that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. They can help. So do what 2.5 million small businesses are doing, and that's using LinkedIn Jobs to hire. Jarvis, crazy stat for the first half, and a couple crazy stats for the first half of this game. But the Dogs defense literally held Tennessee Tech to -7 yards in the passing game in the first half. How, Sway? How?
You know what? I think the defensive line had there was a message that I felt was sent to them saying, "Hey, I need you guys to play better," because we saw last week against Clemson there were a lot of linebackers making those TFLs, and you know had guys like Raylan Wilson. You know, I talked
Yeah.
about how great of a game he had last week against the Clemson Tigers, and now you had a couple of guys on that defensive line who we know had coming into the season the expectations are pretty high for those guys because a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, we don't know who this is," and then you got a guy like Michael Williams not being in the fold. I know he
Yeah.
moved into the outside linebacker role, but he was on that defensive front last year, and a lot of people that question their production. So for me, I feel like it was a defensive line. Those guys were up front getting after it. And when you think about Tyrion Ingram Dawkins and Christian Miller, both of those guys had 4 tackles in the first half. And then it was one time where Ingram Dawkins had made a TFL, and then Miller came right behind him on the next play and made a TFL. So I feel like that defensive line set the tone because when you have a team coming in here like Tennessee Tech, they came in there with a game plan. Hey, let's get the hell up out of here, and run this football till we can't run it anymore. And like I said, the first play was a pass, and then after that, we just run. So that is a charge to the defensive line, a challenge to the defensive line to say, hey, you're just gonna have to stop us. You know what we're gonna do, and you're just gonna have to stop us. And I feel like they lived up to that. And it started with Christian Miller and Tyrion Ingram Dawkins.
Yeah, because when you talk about 116 yards, you got to dig into the numbers to see it took 40 carries to get there. So you really are keeping them under 3 yards per carry, which is all you can ask out of your defense. And like you said, and a guy you talked about, actually, speaking of the linebackers, you mentioned earlier in the week that you wanted to see what CJ Allen was going to do in this game. 5 total tackles, 3 solos, and a tackle for loss. So like you said, you started to really kind of see everybody getting into it and kind of making sure that their presence was felt throughout this game. And you also look at the fact that the Dogs were able to hold this Golden Eagles team to 2 net yards per play in that first half. So when you look at that in its totality, how is the defense able to do that? And especially, like I said, in limiting that Golden Eagles run game?
And here's the thing. I think that, coming into this game, I'm sure Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann, they established like, hey, these guys are going to try to run the ball because they want to shorten the game. They want to limit possessions. They don't want the score to get too out of hand. And they kind of didn't do a good job of that. But we understand what the expectations were for Georgia. Like, hey, they're going to come in, get this game over as quick as possible and try to get out without any injuries. So for me, I feel like the defense, had to load up against the run. And like I talked about with Miller and Dawkins and all of those guys, being able to come in and say, you know what, we have to stop this run. We have to start. Like, we have to start the party, like we still have a party every week on Atlanta Football Party on Locked On Sports Atlanta. They said, hey, we're starting the party before y'all, and then the after party going to be on Tuesday. So I think that
I
when
like
you,
that.
when you had a defensive line playing like they did, that's one of the reasons why you have to look at it and say, hey, these guys have only given up, 6 points in 8 quarters. That just speaks to what those guys are doing to the opposing team's offensive line.
Yeah, and in addition to holding them and really, really kind of making them eat their game plan, on the passing side, 5 receptions for 18 yards. That is crazy. That's a crazy number to just think that they were also able to do it on both sides or in both aspects of keeping that offense in check for Tennessee Tech. Now, you had mentioned it earlier, but I just want to go back to it real quick because none of our shows, we don't care if he's on the field or off the field, gets completed without a Michael Williams moment. Now, of course, we are saddened that we didn't get to see him in the game today to have some conversation about his play because he had great play last week until he went out, of course, with that grade 2 ankle sprain. Warren Brinson also out, but this time dealing with a calf contusion. So who for you, Jarvis, do you really feel stepped up big for Georgia today?
It had to be the two guys that I mentioned. Miller and Dawkins, those guys were some people that I feel like it's a thing where they are the guys that that are being looked to by those young pups. You talking about Joseph Jonah Ajayi, then you had a couple of the young freshmen making some plays in the second half, and when you think about it from that aspect of it, those guys have to lead the way. And I can't mention one without the other because, like I said, both of them had some really, really good games. And Dawkins was dealing with some injuries in the spring, so to see him out there making plays and really being that guy that we all think that he can be, from a potential standpoint, it just goes to show you he's like 6'5", 280, just prototypical size. We talk about going to the next level. I feel like those guys, really accepted the challenge today and said, you know what, we're not going to allow these guys to get anything. And they did that specifically in the first half.
Yeah, and I really do like this. And of course, we never want to see anyone go down. So certainly hope that everything will be okay with KJ Bolden. But I did want to just shout him out because it's always good when you can see those DBs kind of getting into it and making sure that, hey, we're not just about batting the balls down or getting interceptions, but it's also about making sure that we can shorten a play or stop a play. So to see him just, again, get 2 tackles, get a sack, get a tackle for loss, I just think that goes to the philosophy of what Kirby likes to see. No matter what position group you're a part of, you need to be in on the action in all plays to make sure the play shuts down.
Yeah, KJ Bolden is a guy that continues to impress. Like he had the most snaps on defense against Clemson. Come in, get his first career sack against Tennessee Tech. And when you think about it from that standpoint, I already know. Like when you've been in the locker room, you understand. Like there's a certain level of ego, and of course you have the quarterback, and right behind the quarterback from an ego standpoint is doggone DBs. When you have a true freshman coming in here, out snapping folks in the first game, then he gets his first sack. I already know he talking a little trash. Like, yeah, big man, I got my first sack before you did. So what you gonna do about that? So I think that when it's just really cool to kind of see the young DB. I remember when we talked about him when Georgia was recruiting him and he came in, and just to see him kind of go from that making that decision to come to Georgia and then kind of coming in. Then the buzz started happening, and Kirby Smart randomly mentioning him after practice because you don't give freshmen too much credit like that early on, and I think that for him to see that progression from being recruited, Kirby Smart mentioning him, then the first game of the year, and he's just like, oh, so they really are going to make sure he's out on the field at some point. So for him to come out and get this first sack in this game, and it's just, I feel like it's the first of many because this guy can just play all over the field, and Georgia has, and Glenn Schumann and Smart, and they just been like, all right, where we're going to put him this week.
Yeah.
Well, can we look for a specific matchup to kind of get him into? So those are some of the things that really get interesting as the season rolls along.
Yeah, and so good to be able to give KJ Bolden those kinds of tests early so that when you do get into the kind of gauntlet that they're going to get into when they begin to take on Texas and Alabama and Ole Miss, now you've got him a little bit more battle tested so that he's prepared when you know those coaches are going to probably scheme to try to go against him just out of the habit of trying to go up against a freshman. But this ain't your average freshman. At any rate, the Golden Eagles, you know what, Travis, they were just glad for the mercy rule. We'll break that down when we come back in Next Up. This episode of the Locked On Bulldogs podcast is brought to you by Gametime. So Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. So, Georgia's got maybe about 9 more games to play in the regular season, or maybe 10. So you'll have an opportunity possibly to get a ticket in a very difficult place to get a ticket, which is Athens, if you use Gametime. So think about this as well. They have what's called seat views, where you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. So if you've never been to Sanford Stadium and don't kind of know what that looks like for you, check out the seat views for a panoramic view to give you a good vision or idea of where your seat might be. And of course, important as well is the lowest price guarantee, where Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON college for $20 off. Download Gametime today, because what is it? It's game time. Now, Tennessee Tech elected to take the running clock in the second half, which essentially gave them a 10-minute fourth quarter. What do you think, Jarvis, about this rule being able to be invoked and even Tennessee Tech agreeing to use it?
To be honest with you, I don't have a problem with it, because I feel I try to be as straightforward as possible, a straight shooter.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I try to live my life, as I've gotten older and gotten into, who I am as a person, because there is no reason for you to have pride when it comes to the safety of your players, because Coach Wilder understands, he's been out of the game for 3-4 years, so he's just coming back in with the opportunity to be the head coach of the Tennessee Tech. For him to say, you know what, yeah, let's go ahead and get this 10-minute quarter and let's keep this game rolling, because he's just trying to get out of this thing healthy too. I said coming into this game, Kirby Smart, number 1 goal.
Yep.
Not to offense, defense. Hey, get out of the game healthy and be able to move on into SEC play against the Kentucky Wildcats. That's your number 1 goal. And the Tennessee Tech is about to get ready to go into their conference play as well. So I'm sure Coach Wilder doesn't want to play around with that, because that extra 5 minutes, you don't know what can happen. So I don't have no issue with teams saying and understanding who they're up against, and they don't have a real chance to do anything anyway. So let's go ahead and get this game over with. Let's get out of here with a win. Get out here healthy. Excuse me.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember when we were talking about that, what did we want to see coming out of this game? And that was your answer. And I agreed with you, because Georgia does have an amazing amount of depth. You saw it on display for this game, because you were able to see, at least for the last quarter and maybe even a good portion of the third quarter, you were able to see their second string and on some level their third string. So it's great to have that depth. But let's just be honest, Jarvis, you don't even want your depth to be in a position where they could be in danger of getting injured, because you don't want to start getting this roster depleted early. We saw how eventually that wore Georgia down last year, and we still believe, at least on this Locked On Bulldogs postcast and that football party, that if not for some of those injuries, it would never have been a question that Georgia was going to get that three-peat.
So a different story too.
Yeah, different story completely. So I agree with you that Kirby Smart and Tennessee Tech and UGA made the right decision. Let's just do this 10 minutes. Let's make sure we just get out of here healthy, happy, and whole, and let's just push for whomever our opponent is for week 3. But That said, Tennessee Tech couldn't help itself. It had to go all petty monger, little petty, letting the clock run all the way down before kicking a field goal to rob the Dogs of their 8th shutout under Kirby Smart, which they'll get anyway. But that would have been the most in college football since 2016, at least to date, right? So let's be real, Jarvis. You know Kirby's going to use that as motivation for his defense, right?
Oh, absolutely. That is just
Until the
perfect.
last second.
Because T, here's the thing: like when you talk about a defense that is as vaunted as they have been in these first couple of games, and just a tradition of just playing defense ever since Kirby Smart walked through their door in 2016. That is just it gets you kind of boiling a little bit, because I remember when we gave up Goose Egg. That's how our defense was, because my head coach was our defense coordinator. So we took a lot of pride in not giving up a lot of points. And so
Yeah.
I feel like Kirby's gonna use this perfectly. He was like, hey guys, we got stuff to work on. Especially in those young pups, because those guys were coming down. There was a lot of missed tackles, a lot of bad angles on that defensive side of the ball, and that's why Tennessee Tech was able to get off like they did and move the ball down there to get into scoring position. So yeah, this is definitely some teaching moments, I feel, for Kirby. So yeah, because I know the players are probably fired up too, because
Oh,
you
yeah.
love to get that 0 points on the board, because hey, that's the little extra shot or something, when you out there having a good time and you at the party, like, yeah, well, we didn't give up no points today. That's what I'm talking about right there. So yeah, I'm sure from Kirby's standpoint and from the player standpoint too, because that's just the culture. I feel like they're gonna try to figure out a way to rectify that one.
Yeah, and I feel like you're right. There's nothing like a goose egg, and really that's across any sport. You love to be able to look at the final score, and I'm thinking, of course, like baseball or soccer, not of course basketball, but baseball, soccer, football. If you can look at that scoreboard at the end of the night and see a 0, there's just so much of like a sense of accomplishment. But I think you actually hit on something. We joke about what Kirby Smart uses to motivate his team, right? And then you heard the commentators, you heard me just say it, like, I mean, Kirby Smart is really marching up and down the sideline, and this game is virtually over, but he was still coaching up that defense because it wasn't
Right
just about
before they kicked it, he was just grabbing the shoulder pad like, "Hey man, I need you to
yeah. And the reason for that is what you said, Jarvis. It's more, yes, there would be pride for Glenn Schumann. There would be pride for that defense and pride for Kirby Smart if they walked away with a shutout. But let's be real. The more important thing that is going to be a motivating factor for Kirby Smart is what he can teach his young core about how you allowed Tennessee Tech on that final drive to get in position to score. Like you said, it's all the missed tackles, it's the angles, it's the missing your assignment, et cetera, et cetera. But I go back to what I said earlier, which is this is going to be a very long season if everything works out like we think it will, and Georgia will get into the college football playoff. And for me, Jarvis, as many reps as you can get out of the way where it doesn't hurt you, because I mean, 48-3, you're still going to be number one when the polls come out in a couple days.
Sure.
So when it doesn't hurt you to be able to get those guys reps and opportunities to get out there, I think this is still the kind of thing that could bode well for you down the road.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about, figuring out ways to get better. Because when you have that much talent, when you have that much depth, when you have these high behind expectations coming into the season, you got to find things. You got to be meticulous. You got to find, like, nitpick. Like, hey man, I don't like how your hands were, or how your hands were when you came off the ball as a defensive lineman, or I don't like how you got into your set a little too. You blocked them. You got the block. You got it down. You got them. You did your job. But I need you to, really focus in on, because that's going to be the difference once you start coming up against these teams, specifically on the road. Like you talking about, I know people laugh at Kentucky, and I get it, but hey, this is a road game. Brock Vandagriff going to be looking to try to get some get back, I'm sure. Dumas Johnson, I'm sure he's going to try to get some get back for sure. All those things all those little underlying storylines coming into this game are going to be very important when it comes to just how you come out and play and how you start that game, because Kentucky going to try to they're going to try their best. And now, granted, more than likely it's not going to be enough, but those little things and fine tuning those little things that you may have missed out on in this game, but you were good enough to be able to get by. Those are the things Kirby going to be looking at, and I'm sure they're going to get as much film study as they possibly can because, hey, it's time to hit the road and go to Lexington and try to get another conference win.
Yeah, and they averaged against Kentucky 26 points. That's the margin of victory for the Dogs. But when they head to Lexington, victories, yes, but just a 10-point margin. So you're right. Kentucky is definitely going to be up for the challenge, and those former Dogs are probably chomping at the bits to get back at their team. Now, thanks for making the Locked On Sports your first listen of the day, but you know where you can hear more of this kind of conversation? The Atlanta Football Party Dogs Edition. That should be your second listen. And of course, be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are free and available wherever you download your podcasts, and we will see you Tuesday.